Welcome to the Outer Fringe. Hey everybody, it's Sarah and Brian. We are very excited about today's episode. We have an amazing guest here. Her name's Arpil Rayn. And yeah, I'm just, I'm really tired today, but Brian, came and picked me up and he had juiced for me because he's on this juicing kick. And he made me the most amazing fresh squeezed juice. And I feel like, I should be doing this every day. Why am I not doing this? I feel super energized.
The reason you're not doing it is because you don't have the same body shame that I do. It's just, I hit this point where it's 2 weeks to Spain. And I'm going to be in Barcelona, so I'm not going to be on the show in 2 weeks. And we're going to have to work that out as a show. But I'm just seeing this huge gut. And as I was telling Sarah, I went and bought 4 pints of ice cream. And I was kind of why am I doing this? So, and then when you juice, you just buy this whole bunch of produce. It's going to go bad in 3 days.
Can you keep up with this? Because I really like when you bring me juice.
I really like when you make me breakfast.
Yeah.
Sarah makes amazing eggs. And then all sorts of vegan sausage and goodies in it.
Yeah, I do. I do know how to cook. That's one of my few skills in life is cooking, and then anything creative. That's pretty much it's pretty much all I got.
I wish I had either of those.
Yeah. So I'm running on 4 hours of sleep from last night. I went to an amazing show. I watched Johnny Kunk perform, and the Weary Times had their record release. It was so fun. It was so rowdy.
Yeah.
Of course, there was this guy just running in circles. I don't even know what he was doing. He was literally on the dance floor, running in a loop.
Was it an older guy?
No, younger guy. He had a Weary Times t-shirt on.
Okay.
So he was definitely a fan.
Uh-huh.
And he was just running circles. So I don't know. There was an interesting show, but way too late for me. I don't know. The older I get, I just like to be in bed by 9. I do, and I like to get up early. And then, I've got this internal clock where I'm still up at 7 or 7:30, and that's I feel bad because I slept in. I'm oh my God, half my morning's gone.
And you want to know what happened? Because I'm the other way. I'm I'm going to stay up all night. I finally get to sleep around 4. You called me at 8 or 8:30, and I could not get back to sleep. So I hated you for 3 hours. Where I was just trying to oh my God, I'm going to do coffee. I'm just,
I had to shame you. I had to shame you for not showing up to the show last night. I couldn't believe it. You missed out on such a great show.
I was playing Wizards Unite downtown with my friend who was playing Pokemon Go. And then we saw a guy who lost his cell phone at the show, and we had to help. He's older drunk guy with the Hawaiian shirt, glasses hung down on the buttons, right? He's you guys know where there was music tonight? And I was oh, well, there was this show, The Weary Times. Yeah, maybe. I gotta find my phone. I lost it at the show. And been to the Neurolux, right? I'm was there a crown on the back wall, right? Big lit up crown. He's yeah, that's it, right? And well, it's 2:20. You might want to get down there before everyone leaves. And then of course he's on 8th Street until
Did he have a backpack with a bunch of bandanas tied on the back?
Something like that.
Yeah. I think I know that. Yeah, that guy was he was front and center.
See, that's what I love about downtown Boise is it's not really that unsafe, but you just get to see a whole I was going to say spectrum of different people, and I love to people watch.
Oh God, people watching is the best.
Should we introduce April? I want to introduce April
please.
Rayn here. And do you like to people watch? What did you do last night?
Everything's a blur. What did I do last night? I think I spent some time writing, blogging, doing chores. It's all blending together. I literally can not remember entirely. I had some free time, 3 or 4 hours to myself, and that was about the extent of free time that I had in the entire week so far. So,
yeah, I get that. I feel a lot of time blurs together.
What's that?
Way more adult.
I sound way more adult?
Yeah. Let's have your shit together.
Yeah.
I'm working on balance.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Your balance is a big one. I'm definitely always trying to find balance. And discipline.
Mm-hmm.
Discipline.
Mm-hmm.
I am the worst with discipline. I can just spend hours doing nothing and then hate myself afterwards. And I'm oh, there's all this stuff I could have done. But anyways, enough about that. I want to hear more about April. I'm just really excited that you're here. You know, Brian and I met with April the other day, and she told us a little bit about herself, and her story is just so amazing and fascinating. And, you know, I've always been super, I don't know, I just always feel like the idea of having this. So April went through it. Let me go back a little bit. April went through a spiritual awakening, a very profound one. And I've always wanted to have that experience. But the way, you know, after talking to people that have gone through that, it's actually quite terrifying. And all this stuff comes to the surface that we've been burying deep down. And I'd love to hear a little bit more about that.
Okay, well, since you spoke specifically to kind of feeling a little bit surprised about the challenges that it was involved in, I can reflect just a little bit from starting from there if you like. And what it was like was very quickly, once I understood how the unseen was communicating with us in a way that I could verify, I would start to get these downloads or epiphanies or awarenesses, if you will, of just like very much described in the Matrix, if you want to take it there, where it's just information that's truer than we experience in our day-to-day living. And it didn't come with this integration of understanding how it works or feeling okay with it. It was destructive in the sense that every discordant belief that I'd ever inherited throughout my lifetime came up to the cutting block to be obliterated. And you have to, for every new awareness or insight or upgrade, in quotations, if you will, there's so much detoxing that conflicts with that before you kind of hit equilibrium again. And, you know, I can speak to some of those specific ones if that's of interest. But
you know, one thing that I've heard from people who have had this similar type of experience is that they're usually going through like a period of extreme difficulty or pain when this happens. Well, that applies for me, absolutely. I grew up different. I was always sort of an outsider, if you will. I didn't particularly fit in. I seemed to process, you know, sensory information different than my peers. But at the time when all of this kind of came on, it was very much like a light switch, very abrupt, very sudden, very all-encompassing. And it started with a friend who'd crossed over, coming through another medium who was a friend of mine, and she closed with the last line of a prayer that I had written to her before she died. And for me, that was my shifting point. That for me, that was going beyond the shadow of a doubt, which had always kept everything sort of like in limbo, I think, before that. And so what was the question again? The question was mainly that it, like, why is it, I guess.
Right. Yeah. How hard it was. So my friend had died. She had just died. I was just waking up to the fact that my marriage was sort of a facade. We'd relocated from California, and within months the economy dropped out and we lost, you know, $50,000 into equity and relocating. And so just definitely my whole world was shaken up like a snow globe. And I was deeply suicidal. I was hanging on for my life most days and just struggling to show up for my kids as best I could. And I was an anxious mess, and I still am, you know, to some degree, you know, quite honestly. But this has been such a force for healing and growth in my life that I'm able to self-regulate in a whole new way increasingly all the time, and then to help other people find their way through that as well, through that process.
I have a question, but I kind of want to like start at the second part of the question.
Okay.
So you've gone through this process. You're helping other people heal, right? And from what I've experienced, which I think is far less than your experience, but whatever I've touched outside of the veil has been a force of like good, and you might call it just love or something like that. And so, like the second part of the question is that kind of what you experience as seeing something that's crossed over, or something that's an outside force that you now know is there? Is it a good, positive entity?
You mean, is it all positive on the other side?
Yeah.
Pretty much. Well, it comes with a few awarenesses. One, that only the universe is essentially made up of two ingredients, and those are love and fear is completely illusory.
Yeah.
So figuring out how unconscious things, difficult things, challenging things, shadowy, dark, convoluted things, how they're trying to, develop in awareness to bring clarity, to figure out how it could be serving you, to figure out how it could be teaching you, to figure out somehow how it's on your side, is the most efficient way that I've found to, and the most accurate to interact with in spirit.
I like what you just said about how it's really the pain that's teaching us, right? We're afraid of something, so we might see it as a dark force, a negative force, but it's not. It's just not what we want in the moment, usually is how I see it, right? So that's the second part of the question. And really the first part that's on my mind is, yet even though we kind of understand that there's this overwhelming presence of good or love or the positive force, and even what we recognize as negative is just trying to push us through to something else. The first part of the question is, do we always have to go through pain in order to get there? Right? Like to have a painful, traumatic experience, like that's so key. And like, why is it that in order to get in touch with this thing of this presence of love and this greater power, we have to, like, that's the first part of the question.
Like,
really.
Does it have something to do with our ego, like our ego being completely crushed down? Is that kind of what you're
that's what I'm trying to ask.
Let me see.
Because we don't enjoy our walls being broken down.
Right.
We don't enjoy like not seeing reality the same way. And I remember like I would walk outside and I'd just be like, the world did not change, but my perception of the world changed. So the entire world changed for me, you know? And I mean, I wish I could give that to somebody in a kind and generous friendship way, or like a loving way. But everyone else that I've known, like, it was a rough time,
right?
You know,
okay.
Like a long rough time usually.
So there's a couple of things I want to say to address that, and it might not make sense how I'm addressing it directly right at first, but maybe you can hang with me for a second. And the first thing that comes to mind is a meditation that I was doing, and in my meditation, I was popped outside of the earth. And I was looking in at the earth from the outside, and it looked like this Tasmanian devil of like swirling just dirt. And my overwhelming sentiment was on the outside was, let me back in, I can hold it in there. Like my momentum and desire to get back inside of the mess and to hold what I knew outside of the mess inside of it was all encompassing. And it also came with this awareness that nothing was as serious as it seemed. And so I come out of the meditation and I'm pretty ornery about it. You know, what the fuck are you talking about? Like, shit is dire. If nobody happened to notice, like, we're in the apocalypse, and I don't understand how I could take things so lightly, how I didn't know how to bridge what I had received in awareness with certainty with my everyday experience of being a human.
Yeah.
And in that moment, I prayed to Spirit, and I just said, you know, if you can show me that I can take even death that lightly, I'll get a tattoo of a feather from my elbow to my wrist. and in this kind of like, prove it sort of attitude. And I got up and I walked out of my bedroom, and my oldest daughter happened to have a feather in her hand, and she was tickling my newborn's belly right in front of me. Like, look what death brings you. Do you want to trust me now? So I think that we came with great, and I can't speak for everyone, but I suspect that we had great just desires to I don't know what the drive was for that particular accomplishment, but I know that it was incessant. And then the reason I think that most of the healers that I consider peers have such also really traumatic upbringings, usually sexual violations, or some other form of, extreme trauma that resulted in disassociation, was never a factor that was missing for whatever reason. And I don't know why having the ego broken so efficiently opened you up to extrasensory perception. But the closest that I've ever come to a hypothesis that made sense to me was that somehow out of the problem, the solution was born. And creating incredibly, hyper vigilant or aware individuals who aren't lost in the status quo because they don't have the same kind of attachment as the rest of the world, I think has helped them go internally and find that internal navigational system to spirit, to source. And I don't want to say a purity, but that's born of that per se, but a clarity, maybe, from being absent so many of the other filters that other people who are, have healthy, ways of relating being modeled to them have access to.
And I don't think we have access to it here in Western culture. I mean, for over 2,000 years, we haven't had the shaman, right? Of course, the First Nation, medicine man, but their culture was mostly spiritual with nature, which is a great, focus for higher power. So, I have this belief that 10,000 years, I don't know, it's been a long time they're saying humans actually been around. Somebody showed me a picture of an arrowhead from like almost 1 million years. It was 980,000. I was like, no way. I didn't think we were actually like using tools back then. But so 10,000 years, 50,000 years, 100,000 years, we grew up with a culture that said we need a spiritual connection. Now, maybe that's not everyone in the tribe or in the village, but that was at least a person who was centrally connected and could help other people who felt that same connection, right? And my belief is that like a lot of spiritual sickness that we have stems from, well, we've taken that away, and we've kind of looked down on that, it's maybe confession to a priest in the dogma of a church, instead of like, okay, we're gonna sit and we're gonna meditate and we're gonna think about the universe and we're gonna try to get out of this little box again that we put ourselves into. And but it is looked at negatively. I gotta say it. I mean, it's looked at negatively to practice anything outside of normal Western culture, right? With a few religions that are kind of widely accepted here. It's like, what are you talking about? It's even weird when I've told people that I've gone to sweat lodges and they're like, but you're white. And I'm like, but I totally understand that practice. Like I was in a sweat lodge and everything in my body said to run. You have got to get out of here, right? So it's this feeling of death, and I won't die. Like people don't I'm sure somebody has. There's going to be a comment, right? But people usually don't die in a sweat lodge. You just feel super uncomfortable from the heat, at least is what my experience was. But at the same time, I was able to kind of go in and say, but I know I'm safe. Mm-hmm. I'm here. I'm touching a person on my right. I'm touching a person on my left. Mm-hmm. I'm touching the ground. I'm safe. I can be here. And like, you know, people go and get tattoos and they say they're kind of like a bit of out of body from the pain. Mm-hmm. That's the situation I had in the sweat lodge. And like, why not continue these practices? Why not continue this understanding of our fellow human and what we really are and what we've always been, instead of saying, well, since we decided to start counting years in AD instead of BC, mm-hmm. you can only have this certain kind of faith mm-hmm. and this certain kind of mm-hmm. connection, and mm-hmm. it doesn't look the same. It doesn't the same.
I think I'm following you, and I think it just comes down to the degree of grooming and conditioning that we've received, and challenging that is incredibly painful, and it's incredibly difficult, and you have to be incredibly humble and have an incredible amount of neutrality and objectivity to crumble like that. And let me see, I lost my train of thought. I had a really specific point that I wanted to...
I have another question.
Okay.
I want to come back
to
it.
Sure.
Have you faced that? Have you faced people coming up and being like, we don't understand what you do, we don't respect who you are?
Right. Well, when I first began, I'd lose friends. I had to find entire new places I couldn't go out and drink with my husband anymore. I couldn't tolerate the same people. I couldn't tolerate the same places. But every single time I was willing to be transparent and authentic in the face of potentially losing something that I was invested in, what it made room for was so incredibly aligned, and more appropriate, that I began to trust it wholeheartedly. And pretty much it continued until the point of my life where almost my entire life is pretty much magic, and the people that I'm engaging with are magic, and everything that I'm doing is unconventional. And there's really not too many places where I feel like I'm plugged into the system in a traditional way, such as was expected of me, outside of I think the post office and the bank and maybe my kids' schools. From time to time, the rest of my life has come to reflect a completely new reality. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Really.
So one of the things that you talked about when we met up the other day was the dangers of disassociation. Mm-hmm. I wanted to hear you speak a little bit more about that, and how mm-hmm. So many people in our society are disassociating mm-hmm, mm-hmm. and checking out.
Sure. I think the most spiritual thing that we can do is to recognize our sovereignty and to develop the courage to start practicing that. And to me, that just means being willing to face the discomfort or the pain or the challenge so that you can redirect it to a solution-based, area. And instead of doing that, most of us are choosing to disassociate, medicate, fill in the blanks. And when that happens, everything's running on autopilot. You don't have a chance to rewrite the script. You don't have a chance to reprogram your DNA. You don't have a chance to evolve the story. I think everything bad that's ever happened in the course of Earth's history, I would go so far as to say, has been the result of a disassociative state. If I can take a left turn here, there's an exchange or an agreement going on when you're checking out, and it leaves you open to other things that will come in and make things a little bit more bearable before you've developed the courage to take control of the situation for yourself. You know what I mean? So whether that's, another energy that replaces feeling vulnerable with feeling arrogant so that it doesn't have to feel less than. So you become vulnerable to those types of energies that I believe are feeding off of you. So that can be, scary if you wanted to put it in a biblical sense and call it demonic. The most important thing to know about that is that if you're aware of your sovereignty, there's nothing that can challenge that sovereignty. And anything that has power over you is because you were in agreement with an exchange, and you can reclaim that really at any time that fits you.
And the thing with the disassociation, I feel like right now in our society, we keep, like, it's almost like there's more ways than ever to disassociate, whether it be our phone or Netflix has unlimited shows. You can just sit and binge Netflix all day, or you can, like, even through, like, you go to the doctor and they're readily prescribing you opiates for any type of pain you're experiencing. And I have this belief that, and I'm sure you share this, that physical pain is also, it stems from emotional pain, or it's like basically like when you have physical pain in the body, you're usually holding on to something emotionally inside that's coming out. And it's just ways to numb. All these different ways to numb. And then we're going about our life. We're going about our life like working, 40 to 80 hours a week and, trying to raise families and do all this stuff that kind of fits within the matrix. And it's like we never really are taking the time to go within. We're really, like, sometimes people just are like, how am I supposed to find time to meditate? How am I supposed to find, and what are some ways that people can do that and fit it into their lifestyle where they can be more mindful?
You know what? That's a great question, and I want to answer a different one if I could.
Yes, of course.
And I think that paying attention to it all the time isn't really important. I think paying attention to it when you're triggered, when you are feeling limited, when you're feeling constricted, when you're feeling less than, when you're buying into fear, when you you feel like you're giving away your power, that you're at the mercy of something else, looking at the belief behind it and staying in your body long enough to figure out what the potential flip could be. That's when I want you to be embodied above all else. And if you can pay attention to that, and I could get you to practice that, even just trial and error. You're going to be so astonished with the shifting outside of yourself that will be plenty of momentum to keep on going.
And we're fueled with the fear. Like media fuels us with fear. Like everything that we hear, I mean, I feel like it's so ingrained in just everyday life. It's all fear-based, whether, like, the other day my car broke down and it's like all of a sudden I'm just crippled with fear of, like, how much money do I owe and what am I going to do and how am I going to, all of a sudden I'm like picturing myself living homeless on the streets and not being able to pay my bills. And it's like this spiraling effect. Yeah.
So that would make me feel like shit. And so whenever I feel like shit, I know, oh, there's something more true available here. What's my fear? My fear is that I'm not going to be able to get my needs met. I'm not going to be able to access the resources I need to keep my commitments. What could be more true? What else is possible? And and even if you can't figure that out for yourself, even just being willing to question the validity of your belief, that's enough for miracles to start flooding in, shifts of perception and awareness.
Well, there's great amounts of shame that come from what we should look like to other people. And so all of a sudden, if anything goes wrong in my life, well, I'm not perfect. And then the second thought is somebody else is going to know that I'm not perfect and I don't have everything together all the time. So then, that's where I start that whole fear thing. And so it's not like I can take an appropriate step,
right.
And you got the car to the garage, you called, I picked you up, like it wasn't as bad. It's like, oh my God, I can't believe things are falling apart in my life when I really have first world problems, mostly. Yeah.
So I have two things I want to say. Let me see if I can fit them in real quick. And one is like, I would like people, that might sound like a pie in the sky dream, like where I'm like, just think positive, right? No, I want you to be really specific as shit. Like, what does that desire look like? To feel secure, to feel reliable, to feel like you have the capacity to follow through, that you know what I mean? What are those looks like? One example that was sometime last year that was a dramatic moment for me is I've been doing this and practicing this for years and years and years, and it's always a challenging experience. And at no point am I like, I just walk on water now. Every single step you take, like, is that going to be underneath my foot? And is that going to be underneath my foot? But I was living in a little duplex where they were raising the rent about $400 or $500, and I didn't have any verifiable income, and I had so much anxiety to even fill out a application, and I was much further away from my kids' school than I wanted to be, and we were super squished. And so I got real about what I would need for my best case scenario. I need it to be halfway closer. I need it to be something that comes to me because I can't go look for it. I need it to be something that I can somehow afford beyond, a comprehension of how I could possibly, come up with it. And 4 days away from being homeless, I get a phone call, and there's a 3-bedroom house not on the market that they just want somebody to move in. No first, last deposit, just move in. I didn't have to fill out an application. Literally every one of those things I went down my list and I could check off. To do that, I am trembling in my boots. I am shaking the whole way. I am like anchoring in that belief and not letting my brain go back to desperation. And sometimes you almost have to put in your request and then like keep pulling the plug on any like negative, tracks that keep playing until it's provided. So I'm not suggesting that it's easy, and but I am suggesting that it's insane and specific and wildly capable, and I would plead for people to just start practicing that in small and manageable ways. I mean, I had to see it work 500 times before I, dared to take it that far, with my kids. So it's certainly not a shame thing, or everybody should just, There's so much guidance and direction and presence and awareness and paying attention that's a part of it, but it is that simple.
So is it kind of like a reliance on a higher power, or a reliance on the universe in a sense where everything's going to work out, and not giving into the fear?
Yeah, and to a large degree, one of my earliest epiphanies, if you will, were just this sudden certainty that we are absolutely limitless in our ability to create. We can have, do, be, and experience everything that we want with sheer desire. That has been tricky for me. Like when I had that experience, my first thought was, oh my God, that's what they're trying to describe as heaven. Like whoever's trying to describe heaven had the same experience that I just had, and it's beyond description. But then you go right back into like, there's so much struggle everywhere. How can that possibly be true? But it seems to be somehow related to time, because even though it hasn't been on my time schedule necessarily, I can't think of a prayer that wasn't the truth of my heart that hasn't come to pass.
I had an experience like that. My first one I was on the platform in the subway in Boston, right? And this guy, scary looking guy, came up to me, and I had a big smile on my face. I was just like, it just started telling me he was going to kill me straight to my face, Did it for the next 15 minutes, right? And during the 15 minutes, I realized probably isn't going to do it, because every time I looked at him in the eyes, his eyes went away. Yeah. And then I kind of realized maybe this is just like a cough. Like he just can't control what's coming out of his mouth, But after it was 15 solid minutes, I started to lose that smile, and the fear started to come in. And so I said a quick prayer in my head, and like it or not, the prayer that came in my head was, yea, though I walk in the valley of the shadow of death, I shall fear no evil. Right? I was just like, you know, and the train, which should have been there 10 minutes before, because it's downtown crossing Boston, they come, you know, all of a sudden pulled up, and the guy who had not shut up suddenly said, you know, you fucking smiling college white boy, I'm gonna fucking, you know, just yeah, but I want what you got. So the very first thing that I said to him after this was, well, you can have it, as we walked onto the subway together. And like, I started talking to him, and he started telling me how he was like incarcerated over half of his life. And I started like opening up about some of the things that I went to. And so like downtown subway system, you change at different tracks and you go different ways. And so we both got off at a platform a couple of stops down, and we got down on the platform and we prayed together and we hugged. And I cried. I don't know if he cried, but like it was the first time, and it was Halloween night too. It was the first time I had ever seen how the fear that had kept creeping into my mind for those 15 minutes, I didn't let it change my course. And I never could have predicted that outcome. Never in a million years would I have predicted how that went, you know? So it was like, there's got to be something that's controlling that to have it turn out so wonderfully and beautifully from a fearful situation.
Definitively.
Yeah.
That's a beautiful story.
I wanted to talk about me. So
I love it.
Yeah.
I love it. I think that's a great example.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of times I'm thought bombing people, you know what I mean? Like looking behind okay, they're saying one thing, but what do they mean? Right? He doesn't feel good enough. He doesn't feel acknowledged. He doesn't feel like he has access to the same things that I have access to. He wants to close the, you know, imaginary, you know, distance between our worths, you know, that he's perceiving. And a lot of times if you do feel safe being able to verbalize what you can hear somebody else saying, you don't have to change it, you don't have to fix it, you don't have to come to a place where you can agree, but if you can reflect back what you perceive, you know, I see that you're totally overwhelmed, you don't know how to handle your emotions, you're extremely frustrated, you're not sure what the next step is, you don't know where to turn, whatever it is you perceive that you can validate out of that will almost always across the board dissolve the situation. Sometimes it won't, or sometimes it's not safe. And I really encourage people to not underestimate, you know, the power of that, you know, little telepathic, you know, thought bomb or truth bomb, like, hey, you know, you're safe and you're deserving, and, you know, it's okay to, you know, XYZ. And a lot of times people will speak back to me, you know, almost verbatim, like they heard what I said, they didn't realize that it wasn't even their own thought necessarily. So if you can support them in gaining enough confidence to overcome their own fear, which is usually the trigger behind it, a lot of times that'll settle things too.
Well, I mean, that sounds like at least the word compassion to me, which is really tough to practice in a society where we disassociate.
Right.
You know, and if I am more connected electronically, we were talking about that too. I was trying to say, like, can you be spiritually connected electronically? Because, you know, we have so many like media outlets, we've got groups online, we've got people that find like-minded individuals that they wouldn't have found next door, you know, and then, but at the end, we're still looking at a screen. We're not next to somebody. And another thing there is, you know, this might be a little bit more into Sarah's category of expertise, but like, I do believe, scientific mind over here, we are antennas, you know, and if there is a frequency of brainwave that if you can send out a thought that is compassionate, understanding, or something, that there is also some part of somebody else's brain, you know, and we might not be attuned to really recognizing these things, but I believe that's part of what we are. You know, like our eyes are just taking in a frequency, our ears are just taking in a frequency, you know, our brains are big electronic.
Taking in or creating a frequency,
and
you
creating.
know, if you want to get mixed
Absolutely.
words.
No, I don't want, absolutely add that in. We are creating the frequencies as well. And so why isn't that perfectly provable that if we think love and compassion to somebody, that it's going to help improve their communication, at least, you know.
And we live in a society where there's so many labels put on, like we have to have everything kind of have a label on it. Like someone's mentally ill, put a label on it. You know, someone is not identifying with the gender that they have, put a label on it. Like now the label just keeps expanding and expanding, and it has to have like this specific label. And where do you think that all comes from? Like, is it just out of fear of
right? Well, I'm going to take that symbolically, and if we look at, you know, our physiology, when we go through trauma, what happens is we're compartmentalizing things, and we're not accessing them with our explicit memory. We're tucking them in different parts of our body and awareness until we can deal with them at a later point. And so what I perceive healing to be is really creating a life that you don't need to escape from. And that I think is only possible through really starting to pay attention to our inner dialogue, because somebody else can treat us like shit, but is that a mirror of how we're treating ourselves so that we can see that it's unjust? Or what's our relationship to ourselves in response to that? That can actually be maintained to be, you know, super comfortable. It's when we start giving over pieces of our authenticity in exchange for approval that it starts to get messy. So when you're able to really take responsibility for accepting yourself and loving yourself and be compassionate with yourself and allowing yourself to be transparent, the magic that's unleashed from that has been the strongest force that I've witnessed.
So it kind of boils down to you really have to have acceptance and love for yourself in order to accept and love others.
I believe so.
That takes work, though, and so
it does.
Like
it's excruciating. It's the most painful thing in the world, which helps us be compassionate with everybody else who doesn't want to do it. You know, like that's a tough fucking course to sign up for.
Yeah.
And I don't think less of you because you haven't gotten there. Not you in particular, but anybody in particular. It's not a judgment issue.
I'm always working on that.
Yeah. I mean, and let's say that let's not slide over into love and light territory where we don't allow ourselves discernment because we're trying to stay away from judgment. You still absolutely have the right to advocate in whatever way you need to create healthy boundaries, and you'll know that they're healthy enough because you'll go back to that compassionate enough space. If somebody's still taking advantage of you, draining you, that, you know, feels like shit, it's not unspiritual to create enough of a boundary that you naturally start to fall back into that state. So kind of
what happens to me all the time, and I appreciate this phrase now, emotional work, you know, and it's not about friendship. It's not about those like true relationships. It's that other people, and of course we've tossed the term around vampire for a long time, but that's really actually a good term for it, where people kind of like come up and suck energy, and it's like you want to be compassionate, you want to be giving, but you know, there's a lot of people out there that I can't get them to this point where they can do the work that they have to do themselves. And I can say like, hey, I'll support you. I can't do it for you. And it dissolves into, you know, more basically provide for me in some way. And then it becomes that emotional work. And I realize I'm being taken advantage of. And I've always been that gullible. I have no street smarts, none, right? That like gullible kid who's like, I'm gonna try to be helpful, I'm gonna try to be kind to you. And Sarah may not see the side of me. We've known each other long enough. She doesn't see the nice side of me anymore, but we have arguments
sometimes
like the moon.
Debates. Healthy debates,
but for the most part, like I've always ended up in this state where 10 steps later, I realized I was being taken advantage of. You know?
Really, I think providing other people authentic mirrors for them to adjust their reflection in is the most loving things.
Okay, you got to break that down. Provided I know you just said some words, but like you gotta give me like an action item list on that one.
Okay.
Because you know what I'm saying.
I think so. So when we think that we want to be kind, we think the other person's going to be pleased with the outcome. But being honest and an accountability in a reflection to what somebody's offering you is actually the most loving thing you can do. Mm-hmm. And you can go pretty far in that direction of being, loving and accommodating if you can manage to put yourself at the top of that list, if it can never be at your own expense. Mm-hmm. Because doing whatever's best for you is going to be what's best for the other person.
Mm.
I have a question. It was something that, this is something that kind of comes up in my life a lot, and I've talked about it. I think I talked about it in the last podcast a little bit, but loneliness. One thing that I've struggled with my whole life is this feeling of loneliness, not only when I'm alone, but when I'm around people mm-hmm. and within. Mm-hmm. Where does that come from? Is that because I'm like, am I not connecting to mm-hmm. my mm-hmm. higher self enough? What is this?
That's a loaded question, and there's so many angles to take with that. First of all, that may very much speak to how present the other people are with you. What is their level of awareness and engagement? Are they just going through the motions, or, you know what I mean? Is there an inauthenticity while you're trying to, say the right things because you're trying to protect a certain outcome?
And that's kind of what I brought up last week, is I can sense that so quickly with somebody that I'm engaging with.
Mm-hmm. I just want you to like me.
Mm-hmm. I like you, Brian.
I'll say anything.
Most people will.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you feel like that is just because, especially when I'm by myself, I'll just kind of feel this emptiness
mm-hmm.
a lot.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know how much you want me to bite off of this cookie, but I'm just going to choke on the whole thing and say, I think that in that loneliness, we're gearing up to be able to handle the sort of shadow side of the oneness. So I would translate God or the universe into a universal consciousness, everything that all that it is compiled together. And in that there is no other. Mm-hmm. Because you're all that is forever. And that's a hard spin on the nature of existence. And I think that we're part of, sort of like God's or the universe's solution to that
so
circumstance.
It's like a collective consciousness kind of?
I think so too. Yeah. And so as you're becoming increasingly aware, increasingly creative, increasingly powerful, as you're realizing how much of your outside reality you're influencing with your every thought and feeling, and how much of a orchestrator you are in your own life, as you get closer to the truth, being able to hold both of those worlds is pretty intense, and I think part of us solving that is, this is totally speculative, I don't feel confident about this, but my assessment is that we're helping God work out that problem, and that is part of our preciousness. That's part of the limitless affection that comes unconditionally, so extremely so that it feels, I would say, reckless.
Yeah.
Let's get into this. Okay, so right, if we had a determined fate by a god, by a higher power, then it wouldn't matter what you did.
The Outer Fringe was recorded at Triii-Point Studios. Copyright 2019. All rights reserved. Statements and opinions made on the show do not necessarily reflect the views or beliefs of Triii-Point Studios or its members.